want to earn more? Work less and enjoy what you do each day. It's no secret, it can be done. This podcast with Dr. T will not only educate and inspire you, it will also teach you how to do more and be more with the time you already have. It will be like a shot of adrenaline straight into the heart of your business. Here is your host, Tyson Franklin.
Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and welcome to this week's episode of It's No Secret with Dr. T. With me today is Ronsley Vaz. He's the founder and chief daydreamer at Amplify, Australia's first audio marketing agency, which is pretty cool. And Ronsley and I go back a couple of years now. We met in Bali, which was fantastic. So Ronsley, how you doing?
Really well. With the occasional challenges to deal with when you're running an agency and other stuff. I feel good, but I also feel challenged at a lot of times, more frequently, I think, these days than what I think. But maybe it's because, you remember what's happening right now as opposed to, previous stuff. You kind of forget a lot of things. But I am super psyched in terms of what kind of stuff we're doing these days. And, we're got a studio coming.
What is an audio marketing agency? If someone's listening to this and they're going, okay, what the hell is what is an audio marketing agency? What is it that means?
Well, here's the thing, right? When the phrase was coined, there was no other audio marketing agencies out there. So I literally made up the term because what was happening was, podcasts were being created, like audio was being created, but they were not being marketed. It was just like, authors that had a whole bunch of books in their garage that never got a chance to be read because of no marketing that followed it. But also, even if the authors who had those books got into people's hands, there was no way for the people that read their books to actually come and buy from them later because, that did not exist. So on the back end of creating audio for a business in particular, actually it goes for any brand and any personal brand especially, you have to layer marketing foundations as well as sales machine so that you can get the ROI from what you're creating, but also from the relationships and all the ROI that I think we neglect as podcasters, to gather that all together and make sure that it is returning on investment. So that's what an audio marketing machine is. It is a machine that is implemented in a business to get return on investment while bringing the creative and the commercial together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's sort of like you said before, going back with people years ago wrote a book and just thinking that they've written that book. Now I have a book. Now what do I do with it? Right. So this is like the same thing. Some people create audio, whether it's a podcast or some other form, and then they're going, okay, now what do I do with it? They don't know how to market it.
Yeah, 100%. But also there's like, even if they market it well, if they don't have a sales machine on the back end of that, then they suffer in the sense that the return on investment doesn't come through the podcast, and they kind of go, the podcast is not returning on investment. Of course it isn't, because by itself, a podcast is a podcast, like a book is a book. And that's what an audio marketing machine is. It's all those three pillars being implemented into a business together.
So it's learning how to use your audio and then how to generate a product from it, or just how to create income from it at the back end.
So it's actually built on the 7-step Amplify framework, and that's broken down into three main pillars, which is launching audio, which we all know how it's done. It's like, you create a podcast. It's all the systems that are set up to make a podcast happen, go on iTunes and all that kind of stuff. And that's one of the pillars. But before that, marketing foundations need to be established, which is the audience and the partnerships, and need to be very, very clear, followed by the branding and the product ecosystem, which means what lead magnet do your listeners take before they go down a path where you can help them take the logical next step. So that's a product ecosystem. Then you launch the audio, and then you have a sales machine, which is another pillar on the back end of the launching your audio, which allows you to take these people that are listeners and nurture them to a point that when you're actually having a sales conversation as a business with someone who is a potential prospect, they already know why you're awesome, and you're not having to convince them on that sales call, so it doesn't become icky. So that's the idea around, implementing those three things in a way that it's set up so that the icky sales calls don't happen, but the audio that is being created is being repurposed across all those different ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So a lot of people, they go, oh, I want to start a podcast. So they start a podcast and they go, why do I only have 25 people listening to it? And your answer is because you have 25 relatives or close friends. They haven't put any thought in behind before they even started the podcast about what their product ecosystem and how they were going to market this before they even started.
Yeah, I think, Tyson, you say that so eloquently, like I'm going to pick that, because you're right. I think what happens is that, the best thing about a podcast is that it's easy to do. And the worst thing about a podcast is that it's easy to do. So
yeah, I've heard that. It is, and it's so true.
Yeah, and also the stat is quite right. There's 93% of podcasts that have 7 or less episodes. And that's a crazy stat. And it's a crazy stat because I've actually asked that stat in different conferences around the world while I've been speaking. And people have agreed to that stat. And I'm sure you were in the room when that happened at We Are Podcast last year. Right?
Yeah.
So clearly. So I find that crazy because I think that, it's easy to, and I think that the imagination of what the podcast lands up becoming is also quite interesting, right? Because if you listen to a whole bunch of different types of podcasts and audio documentaries, and you're creative in nature, and you can take stuff that you've learned in I don't know, like film and transport that to audio, then you can create really, really beautiful stuff. But then if that doesn't return on an investment, it's like all that effort's gone, and it's not commercially viable. It's not sustainable to create that art. So I think people don't put enough time figuring out why they're different and really figure out why they're different, why they're creating this platform. How does it benefit people? How are they going to stand out? And who the listeners are. And here's the thing, Tyson, I feel like that the main reason for not answering those questions is because, ever since we were kids, we were told not to stand up and speak out.
Yeah.
So differentiating ourselves is like such a hard personal journey. And, a lot of times the answers are so hard that we don't want to face them at that time for whatever reason, So it's like it's a really intimate journey, and it's really fascinating to be part of, some people's journeys along the way. So I don't know whether that answered the question, but
I don't know. Everything you said was good, and I can't remember what the question was. But I know, I do remember. It was people launching the podcast because they go, I have an idea of a podcast. And like you mentioned, it could be, I love film, so now I want to talk about films on a podcast so I can share that information and my love of film with other people. But they can only sustain that for a certain period of time unless they're doing it purely out of love and enjoyment.
Well, even if they're doing it out of love and enjoyment, there comes a time when, if you're not getting return, either if the return is not in terms of audience or some sort of return, some sort of satisfaction from this whole thing.
Okay, that makes sense. So if no one's listening to it, you're going, well, why am I doing this when I've only got 15 people listening to it? And it's the same 15 people I see down at the pub.
Yeah, I mean, it's all return comes in different ways. Return is not only money. Return is like fulfillment. Return is like relationships. Return is connection. And then there's so much of return that podcasting. I mean, like look at you. Like you were like a wound up doll that once we just kind of wound you up with podcasting, you're just fucking gone and gone and gone. And and it's primarily because of the connection you get in this conversation, Tyson. There's no other reason why. Everything else is a bonus. You know what I mean? And you're getting return from that, and that's why it's okay for you to think about it. Like, I'm not saying that you don't, but I'm just saying in that instance, it's okay to say this is for enjoyment. And does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and that was a really good point then when you said about your return on investment. And a lot of people think a return on investment is purely money, but sometimes return on investment are connections you make and the friendships that you make, and just the network of people you end up connecting with long term through podcasting, I think is actually underrated.
Yep, I have to agree, and I think that in the day and age of digital and how quickly we want things, unfortunately, stuff like words like networking are becoming icky, like sales conversations. They
Yeah.
become these terms because people are like creating these cookie cutter approaches only to get this weird outcome. When at the end of the day, it literally is about connection. It's about yeah, I mean, you should talk to this more than I mean, I'm super like impressed and proud of your journey, Tyson. It's so awesome. Especially starting another podcast, like the story about you going to a conference and recording and at night doing all the editing and publish. Like, it's so cool. I love that you love the medium. That is the reason why I do what I do, to be honest. The business is all the other stuff is bonus, but
It is enjoyable. Like I didn't realize I was at a conference earlier on this year, and somebody said to me, if you go back to all the things that you really loved doing as a child, that will give you some hints on what you should be doing as an adult. And I remember as a 9 or 10-year-old getting my first cassette player, and I used to hide the cassette player around. I'd ask my parents a question: can I have this? And they go, well, your mother and I need to talk about it. Okay, now prior to asking that question, I'd already set my tape player up underneath the table and had pressed record. I would leave, and then I'd come back after they'd had the conversation, and I'd listen back to the recording to find out what I had to do to actually get them to say yes.
It's crazy you say that, Tyson, because I remember you saying that when we were first talking about you starting the podcast. I remember that conversation because you said that, and that's so crazy.
I know.
Right?
So I've always liked audio. I've always liked listening to things, and yeah, what you mentioned before about when I was at the conference, and every day I recorded people at the conference and then edited it all and released it that night. But another thing I did recently was episode 170 of my podcast, and I was going to Powell River to see some friends, and before I was going, it was about 9 months before the trip. So I'm going to write the Chamber of Commerce and find, do they have a lunch on around that week that I'm there? Do they need a guest speaker? Yeah, I've written a couple of books.
Yeah.
And so I wrote to them. They said, no, we don't. We don't actually have a lunch on that week. But you know what? We'll put one on because we don't get too many authors coming into town. Oh, and how cool is this? So they put on a lunch in the Powell River Chamber of Commerce. Had about 55 people there. The mayor came along, the newspaper. I was in the paper. It was great. It was a really good day. But what I did is I hooked up a lapel mic and hooked it to my iPhone, and I recorded my whole conversation, my whole presentation.
Yeah, beautiful.
And that was the podcast that I released on episode 170. Was that actual talk that I did, and because I did it because I like to listen back to what I say when I do a presentation and go, what worked, what didn't work, did I engage with the people right? Did this joke work, or did it just fall flat? Take that out of the repertoire. But when I listened back to it, I went, wow, this is really cool. I'm going to use this one. This is something a bit different. So I think audio's there's so much power on what you can do with it, even if it's self-learning.
No, I mean, 100%, Tyson. I mean, that in itself is so massive. I mean, that adoption is really insane, right? I mean, from you being a podcast listener to being a podcast host to being podcast host on 2 podcasts to, you were already an author and speaker before that, and you see how the love of audio has sort of moved around in your life, and where you're now recording, you're kind of thinking differently to what you were thinking before you were a podcaster. So that's a lot
differently, yeah.
So awesome. But also, like, when you think about, like, yesterday I had a conversation with a company down in Silicon Valley on how their audio is not even at the, like, not in the tip of its iceberg in terms of technology adoption. So when you think about how we interact with images or video, like how we share stuff, and how we can just now selfies have become a thing, right? Like how that is a thing. Voice is going to become a thing, and how to share voice, and they have this platform, and I find that insane. Like we've not even gotten to that part of the audio adoption. So I'm super excited where we're at. I think it's pretty cool to be, in this space for sure.
So where do you see audio heading? Heading. What sort of word is that? Where do you see audio heading?
Yeah, it's the best part about being a podcaster is that it doesn't matter how many of these you do. And I know you've racked up quite a few interviews over the last couple of years. How many do you have already that you've done?
I think this is going to be episode 171.
Right.
And I've done about I've probably recorded about 40 on podiatry legends as well. So well over 200.
Nice. That's amazing. And it's what, 2 years?
It'll be 2 years in August.
That's phenomenal. That's a phenomenal return. Phenomenal repetition. So you get better at everything, right? With the amount of repetition. So over the last 6 years, I've done like 900 and I've stopped counting. I used to be 800 a while ago. But the point I'm trying to make is the fact about doing that you still make mistakes and you still make the same mistakes, similar mistakes that you made at the start, and everyone's trying to get so perfect, and it's not necessarily about that, it's about the repetition. So when you made that error, that's the whole story. That's why I wanted to tell you all this stuff.
Yeah, well, I won't edit it out. It won't be edited. I'll just leave it there.
Sorry, so can you repeat the question so I don't talk about something else?
Oh no, I said with audio itself, where do you personally see it heading in the future?
Yeah, so I kind of look. I don't want to make bold statements here.
I'll be bold. Be like Nostradamus. Just make a prediction.
But if I look at how text has been adopted, right? You look at how blog posts were never a thing, and that content was not valued at the start, and now people are bloggers for a living. And then the same thing happened with video when YouTube came along and YouTube adoption happened. And if you just look at those two trends in terms of just content adoption, it's interesting to see that audio is not even at the start of that journey. Like, we're still just producing audio, we're not even interacting with audio yet. So that is really exciting, and I know a lot of people working really intently on that, is how to interact with audio, how to make audio more shareable, how to make you hear something really cool, how do you kind of tell someone else that, hey, listen to this little bit, bite. And I just came across a really cool app called Bullet.
What's it called?
Called Bullet. Bullet. And I can't remember the actual link, but it's in the We Are Podcast group. So, or it's actually I've shared it on my personal profile. So it's called Bullet, and it's really awesome in what it does, because you can be playing a podcast on any platform, whether it's Spotify or Overcast or iTunes or Google Play, and you suddenly listen to a bit that you're like, oh, that's really nice. You kind of go to the share button and say share through Bullet, and Bullet will pick up and convert to text and make a little video of the 15 seconds or 30-second clip.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah, so you can share it. So it's not necessarily for audio hosts as much as it is for audience listeners. And when I shared it, was really interesting, because every audio host or podcast host went, oh, I'm going to create this. It's like Headliner. And I'm like, no, this is to train your audience.
To share your stuff.
To interact. Yeah. So it's like, I think one of the things is that we're not thinking big enough, because audio is so new. So the imagination about where audio can go is so limited, because the experience isn't there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You give me a boner talking about this. Sorry, but it's just when you said that, it's not about me using it to promote the podcast. It's about letting my listeners know, hey, you listen to an episode like this one today, and Ronsley says something, and you go, oh, that's awesome. I want to share that. Them using that to share it, and they're promoting your podcast. Yeah,
100%. Because at the end of the day, you're creating a podcast. I think the people that we interact with are creating a podcast because it's their journey as well. Like, putting your voice out there is no small task. It gets scrutinized a lot.
Oh, it's nerve-wracking when you first start. I remember my first episode, you interviewed me on episode 1.
Well, did I?
That's
so cool.
Yeah, so on my first episode, I was the guest, and you said, Tyson, you should be the guest on your first show so we can talk about what this show's all about.
Yeah, nice.
And I was shitting my pants. I was really nervous, and I was like, dry mouth. And now I feel so relaxed when I'm doing it. And I think the only other time I've been really nervous was episode 5.
What happened then?
Calvin Wayman. I don't know if you know who Calvin Wayman is, but he was the first person I'd had on the podcast or that I'd organised that I did not know. He was someone that I'd heard him on another podcast. I reached out to him. He'd just written a book called Fish Out of Water, and he actually said yes. And I went, oh, crap. And so I remember doing the introduction, and I can listen back to it now, and I can still hear it in my voice where I'm starting to run out of air as I'm doing the introduction.
Yeah.
But that's been the only 2 times I've really been worked up. Other than that, I've felt quite comfortable.
And it's also really interesting because you know that initial one that is so scary is so important because it makes all the ones following that so much more easier, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, that's really awesome, man.
So you've actually written a book called Amplify.
Yes.
Why did you write a book?
To be very honest, I wrote the book because I kind of wanted to document the framework, and also we have a mutual friend, Andrew Griffiths, who has been telling me to write a book for ages. And I actually had a manuscript written, went to the editors, came back, all around food and in fuel and how to, eat right to achieve your goals and that kind of stuff. And never got to actually releasing it. But when Amplify was formed and I kind of didn't spend any money on Amplify. In fact, I didn't have a name for Amplify. I said to myself, if I can get my first 10 beta clients, I'll decide about website and all that kind of stuff later.
Yeah.
I had 8, and then one called me up and said, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine who I think could really use your services. What is your business? What are you called? And I said, I'm going to call you back. And I I Googled powerful verbs. This is a true story. I Googled powerful verbs. I didn't even get to B. Under A, there was Amplify. I'm like, that sounds awesome.
I think I need to do that.
And I called him back and I went Amplify. And I used a couple of tools online, just look at whether obviously Amplify was not available because it's such a common word. But Must Amplify was available across all platforms. So I registered literally after telling him the name is Amplify. I registered the name Must Amplify and through ASIC and stuff like that. And then I decided that I had to write a book because what was happening was all that while I was kind of just saying stuff. Like there was no legitimacy in terms of the process, right? And because podcasting was so new and is still very, very new, it was harder to explain. But a book, if someone was really interested, they could read the book and understand what the principles of what I was trying to ask them to do. Because, even today, going to a business in Australia and saying, hey, I think your business is going to benefit from having a podcast, they will laugh you out of the room. It's not the case in America, which is really interesting. Everyone there actually it's crazy how that market is different from Australia. But the point I'm trying to make is the book was primarily written to explain my philosophy around why audio, why now, and how to get it right for your business in actually a way that you want to talk about it and not in this really, snake oil salesman-y sort of way that people think get you results, but that's not really true. It's just those people that are screaming the loudest. And that's why they get noticed. And all our clients and all the people that consume our stuff is really creative people who know that they're great at what they do, but they don't want to talk about it themselves. And they're already great at what they do. They just want to, learn more, and they want to be a student of their they create a podcast to learn. They don't create a podcast to teach. And that's the big difference. So that's why I wrote the book.
And it's interesting too what you said, the difference between Australia and America. So you reckon in the US, the idea of having your own podcast, they take that up a lot easier than a lot of Australians will?
I think business is more mature there because, if you drive into Manhattan or you're driving out of Manhattan, you go into the airport, if you're flying out of LaGuardia, for example, like there's a big billboard in the center of Manhattan that says I Heart Radio and Podcast. It's the only main one that's visible. So when you think about that kind of adoption, think of of how mature that market is and how long it'll take for something like that to happen here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I've spoken to a lot of people and I've said to them, geez, I think your business would really benefit having a podcast. And they're like, yeah, they sort of just, the thought of doing that, and they don't realize the type of business they have, it would just tie in so well with what they're doing. Even just connecting with their existing clients, if they were the only people that were listening to it, that they could offer so much added value to their clients that they only see once a year around tax time.
And it's leverageable, right? You record once and you can listen to it whenever. So, and you're already having those great conversations. Most businesses are already having those great conversations. And I don't know, I feel like podcasting allows, especially the founder of a business and who maybe the founder has gotten to a point where, the business is operating and has been, and it's great. It gets returns. But, to actually talk about why they do what they do, there's no better, for me personally, I'm obviously biased. There's no better platform to sort of get on that journey of explaining or putting your story out there.
And the other, can I ask you a question about your book too?
Sure.
Is your book on audio?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay, somebody asked me that the other day. They said, Tyson, is your book on audio yet? And I went, no. They just laughed. They said, so do you love podcasting? Why is your book not an audio book? And I went, yeah, good question.
Yeah, really fascinating, right? So this is one of the other businesses that I formed. It's called the Library of Sound. And the reason it was created was I wrote the Amplify book in 2016, and I wanted to make it an audiobook.
Yeah.
At the time, no one in Australia, even now it's hard, but at the time, no one in Australia could upload to Audible. Even if you made it here, and then people were charging like so much of money to get an audiobook made. So we created the Library of Sound, and our first book actually was The Me Myth that we recorded. We signed a deal. We were the first agency to sign a deal with Amazon, which we have a 10-year deal to upload, to be the only agency at the time to upload to Audible in Australia. And but we just keep doing our clients' books until very recently where Amplify went up. But, plumbers have leaky taps too. So
yeah. So to get a book converted, if somebody was listening to this now and they have a book, what's it cost to get it converted to audio, if you were reading it yourself?
So just to get them narrated and it being recorded, edited down to Audible standards, and we returning it all back to them edited down is I think just over $5,000.
That's not too bad.
It's not bad at all, actually. But so that's like 40,000 words.
And that's getting it all uploaded into Audible at the same time?
No. So the uploaded distribution is the next level. So it's a middle package, which is just under 9 or between 9 and something. I forget. But it's like $9,000. But that includes all the upload and, creating all those pages and putting it to different spaces and that kind of stuff. And then we have a top level, which is like $19,000 or something, and these are all through Audible. So with the, you can't go to Audible and say, I want to put my book. You have to go through us, or you go through someone in the States who's got access to the ACX, which is the Audible exchange. And that's how you put the book onto Audible. So, and then the top end packages with content and marketing and all that kind of stuff for your book. So that's how we have those 3 packages. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I've started listening to a lot more audio books recently. Probably this year more so than anything else. Just started every couple of weeks downloading one, listening to it. I'm at the gym and doing other things, and I've gone, yeah, audiobooks are pretty cool. And it's funny how some will be read by the author, and some are read by an actor.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why would one person, is it because their voice is no good or they just don't feel confident doing it?
That's such a great question, Tyson. So we've actually made it really clear to whoever comes in through Library of Sound to ask us, and we're kind of, the next one we can record in a couple of months. So like people come in and ask us for audiobooks all the time is the point I'm making. But we actually make it very clear that we are author read only. And the reason for that is I believe that people don't put their voices out much, and there's this underlying sort of society thing, right? Of don't stand out, don't speak up. It doesn't matter where you're in school or family, it doesn't matter, right? It's just like don't do that, don't say that, don't whatever. So that's an underlying cause, but someone just narrating the stuff that they've written is so powerful just for them. And I think it also comes through because they actually get a chance to explain what they're saying as opposed to them narrating the words.
I was going to ask that. So when somebody's reading, say, a chapter from their own book, it's okay while they're reading that chapter to then add extra stuff that isn't not in the book.
Of course they can. And it's only when they get into the explanation of what's in the book that they get into that flow. If they're just narrating, so we make sure that training happens as well before, we start recording. So what I'm trying to get at is I don't think people understand how powerful, just having an audiobook or going through the practice of recording an audiobook is, one. Two, that you can't just go to, Upwork and say, I want to record an audiobook. It's actually a specialized skill.
Yeah.
And it's not a simple task. It is like, because you don't narrate normally, you converse. So learning to narrate is one thing, and then learning to narrate while explaining is another level. So, it's a learning curve, and it's not easy. So I assume that that's primarily why, most people, and we get a lot of inquiries, so people say, can I get someone to read my book? And yeah, we can get someone to read their book, but I'm sure there are other businesses that would happily take them on as a client. And I we can. It's just another thing to organize, and I've got too much on my plate, maybe. So.
Yeah. Because I was going to say, so you got your Amplify agency, Library of Sound.
Yeah. You're
still running 3 podcasts yourself?
So one is going to rebroadcast mode, which is Bond Appetit, which is the one that, and I think the reason it's gone into rebroadcast mode is because of the amount of listeners that are still on that show, but are new, and also that it got me, famous, I suppose, in the world. It made everything happen, and it was the big capstone.
So everything. Are you going back and going from like episode 1 and bringing it all out, or are you picking the best shows and re-releasing them, or are you taking snippets from different shows and putting them together?
Right now, we're just re-releasing them, and what we're doing is we're building, we're signing a lease for a studio down in West End, which we're already in here right now. Are
you going to get bricks and mortar?
Yeah. I
remember talking to you a couple of years ago about that, and you were, back then you were sort of like, I don't think I need bricks and mortar.
Yeah, I would love to have that conversation because a lot has changed, obviously, since then. And it's been a really mental struggle because Amplify was built on freedom. So going back to bricks and mortar, or having this as an option, has been a big hurdle for me to overcome and to get to this point.
I think you're making the right move, because the thing I like about bricks and mortar is something that's tangible, that over a period of time you can pay off, and it's an asset.
Well, I suppose.
It forces you to actually use your money for something. Otherwise, you'll just keep pissing it against the wall and enjoying life too much, which is nothing wrong with that. But I think when you have a commitment of some bricks and mortar, it makes you take a percentage and put it into something that's going to be there long term.
Yeah, well, I also think that, bringing a bunch of people together, because we're, having a studio here. We already have a studio in here, but we're building a bigger one so we can have a weekly show that runs out of here. So there's a lot of different things happening, I think, and that's why that's going to rebroadcast mode. The point I'm trying to make is our new audio team members will go through rebroadcasts and do the editing on that as training. So there's multiple reasons why it's in that mode, and it's up to them. So it depends on where they're at, right? in their training. If the first time they expose the audio, then it'll just be a rebroadcast that's exactly sort of just edited down.
Yeah.
But if they're, you know, so it's used in that manner. But it's just start from one and go backwards at this stage.
So your other podcast, Should I Start a Podcast? That one is still going on the weekly basis with guests, interviews.
That's right. That one's still going on a weekly basis. And Psychology of Entrepreneurship is my next big one.
Has that started? That started, hasn't it?
Well, I've interviewed for it.
Yeah.
And the plan was to release it as a series. And it will be released as a series. So the plan was to release it as a series and then follow it up with weekly episodes, like we did with The Shift. I don't know whether you have a chance to listen to The Shift that we did for Catherine Maslin.
No.
So we did an audio documentary for Catherine Maslin. That's a naturopathic clinic down in Brisbane. And season 1 is all on gut health. And it's a showcase, really, of her and the experts she interviewed. So it got the best parts of everything podcasting and created this audio documentary of 16 episodes. And they all released like a Netflix season, all 16 episodes in one go, heavily produced, sound design on top of that and all that kind of stuff. And now we're preparing for a guest series, which is all the people she interviewed for that are gonna, we're gonna release a guest episode every week. But for Psychology of Entrepreneurship, it's going to be the other way around. We're going to release the guest episodes first and then build the series, just because.
Yeah, because I remember when you were in the States, and I remember you talking about it, and you were teasing with a few little snippets and pictures on what you were doing.
Yeah.
But I knew I hadn't actually listened to the actual podcast yet. So, okay, you've been holding it back. And just to point out to people, anyone listening to this, and they're going, okay, who is this Ronsley dude? Yeah, he sounds pretty smart. He is a very, very smart dude. But you got a master's in software engineering, psychology, you're a chef, and you're 120. You have to have done everything you've done. You must be 120 years of age, and your voice still sounds really good for being that old.
That's so funny, Tyson. I love chatting with you because you make me feel so good afterwards, or even better. But yeah, it's really crazy because even my wife points out, and we've been married for just like under 7 years now, and she'll point out things like, wait, you did that too? And I kind of realized, okay, this is kind of not normal. But I don't see that way. I just logical next step, I just put one foot in front of the other. But when someone asks me now, in hindsight, I can connect the dots and go, oh, that sounds like a crazy, awesome thing. But man, I think Australia is such a country that allows you to do this kind of stuff. And I don't think we realize how lucky we are to, be here and have the opportunities, because I guarantee you it's not easy like this in other parts of the world. So I got a chance to do what I did because of the environment and the platform that was given to me through various reasons. And yeah, it's been good.
So your psychology background, is that what led into the psychology of entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So what I was seeing the most is all our clients are very emotionally intelligent, and they're kind of, it's really fascinating. I mean, it's not necessarily about the business. The business is a tool, is part of them. It's not them. It doesn't consume. Does that make sense? It's a very different sort of type of person. And those kind of people were having similar conversations, and the conversations were around what is it like in between the years, like what's the brain doing, like what's the mind doing, what's the emotions doing during this phase that we call business, because a lot of the times it's very emotional because we create it from nothing. It's like a baby. So I wanted to take the next step and have the different set of conversations, which was around psychology, but also it ties really well into the kinds of clients that land up becoming first class and blue chip clients at Amplify.
Yeah.
Like those kind of like, they are thinking they're feeling on those, not even thinking, because it's not a mind thing. It's like they're feeling that they're ready for the next step, but they don't know what that is. So the Psychology of Entrepreneurship season 1 is on imposter syndrome. And
oh, geez, haven't we all had that?
Yeah. So it's so fascinating, right? And so interesting. I've interviewed jet fighter pilots in the States, and coaches for national teams, and people who are advisors to Justin Trudeau in the state of Canada.
So when you were connecting with these people to just explain people to go through the process,
yeah,
it's not something that you wrote to 16 people said yes, and then you went and interviewed them. When you were selecting who you were going to have on this particular show,
yeah,
how many rejections did you get?
Oh, heaps. Oh, yeah, dude. Like,
I just want people to understand that this wasn't just, oh, look, yeah, I'm going to put this show together. I wrote to 16 quite well-renowned people, and they all said yes. It doesn't always work that way.
No, this is really important. I try to explain this a few times at We Are Podcast in 2 consecutive years, last year and the year before, actually, was that we fail more often than we succeed. And our list of failures, like if we consider them, right? And failing is not a bad thing. It's really, really important. It's just like something did not work that way. That's totally cool.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we don't try something new because we're scared of failing. And don't get me wrong. It sounds like I'm on the soapbox, and I get it wrong all the time. But the point I'm trying to make, which I forget now,
rejection.
Yeah, I get rejected and I fail quite often. I just get better at dealing with it. It doesn't go away, I don't think. And even if we try not to get rejected or hurt, we actually create scenarios where that happens more and more. It doesn't go away. So, whoever's listening, if you don't take anything else out of this whole conversation, I just want to say that the thoughts that are going through your brain are normal. It happens to everyone, and there are underlying systems like imposter syndrome or I'm not good enough is an underlying tone that has just been passed down, and it's just been passed down and passed down and passed down from generation to generation, when us not knowing the rituals that we do and the things that we do, and that just reinforce that idea. And it happens with everything. Everything is just created. We've just made everything up, so everything else can be, like, however you want to live can be made up. And just be open to that. It's beyond the tactics. It's beyond that. It's like this connection, and there's interesting things happening. So when you reach out to people, I have to say that yes, I got rejected a lot, but it is less than what it used to be when I first started.
Yeah.
And it's a different sort of type of audience as well, because I go now with, a personalized audio invite, or, there's a book, and there's a lot of, like, we run the conference. There's a lot of credibility that backs us saying, I'd love to interview you. And that helps. But even at that stage, we're getting rejected a lot. So, yeah.
So over a period of time, you've actually built up some street cred because you've had other guests who have, that have been, like, now you could pretty much approach anybody in the podcasting world and say, I'd love to have you at We Are Podcast at my next event. And be rare for someone to say, oh, no, I don't know who you are. Nearly everybody knows who you are now, because over a number of years, you've slowly built upon the guests that you've had, and you've developed this social proof on who you are.
Yes, I think I have. And I think I think, to be honest, the struggle there is like, I think with most people that are speakers today, I mean, yourself included, like, we get asked to do stuff that we don't really know. We want to do stuff for the betterment of everything, but we don't really know whether the effort's going to be worth our while.
Yeah.
So I think that's always something that to keep in mind, and everyone's on a different timeline. Everyone has their own life, and rejection doesn't necessarily mean anything at all. It's not any reflection on you at all. But yes, people still say no, though. They have different things happening in their life, and sometimes they actually even go, well, you don't have, like, over 1,000 people that come to your event. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not the kind of event that I'm running. And they say no for that. And that is okay, because if I brought that speaker that wanted 1,000 people to an event that had, really connected 200 people that have the best 3 days ever, then they might not get any value from that speaker. So it's just keeping that in perspective, I think, because we've had a lot of, initially especially, a lot of speakers saying no based on that, because I didn't have any cred, but I didn't want to have a big conference like a fest.
So have you ever had somebody say no to you, and they were slightly, like a bit of a dick about it, the way that they said it? Because sometimes you can say no, oh no, sorry, I'm really busy at the moment, it doesn't fit in with what I'm doing. Or some people can say no and be slightly rude when they say it. Have you had that, and because they've said that, and now that you're starting to build a bit of a profile, have any of them come back to you and go, oh, my schedule's freed up, I'm now available?
Yeah, I mean, that happens all the time, but I think...
do you hold a grudge?
I'm not anymore. I used to, of course, but, I think that's what I'm saying. Like, it's such a personal development journey for me. It's more than anything else. And that kind of stuff being taken for granted, and that, happens all the time. And I think that it's really, really important to build your own self-confidence and self-worth, that it does not necessarily it doesn't affect you to a point where, you're down about it. You might feel hurt, but you can get that hurt and do something with it, and don't really feel down about it, because you already know, your worth, and you already have the confidence in that. So I think those things are really good that happen, and it really trains us in a different kind of way. Because to be honest, I think, entitlement is something that should be just beating the shit out of us in general. So that's a really good way to be to have less entitlement, I think.
I was hoping you'd say that, because I've still obviously got a lot more maturity to grow. Well, what's funny, on It's No Secret with Dr. T, this podcast, I had very little rejection, if any. Most people I've asked have been really polite if they can't do it, or they've just said yes. Whereas on the Podiatry Legends podcast, I've had some dickheads. Just some responses that I've just gone, wow, that took me by surprise, the way that they responded back. And and I thought, you know what, I've got enough other people that I know want to be on my show, that if you then come back and approach me, I won't have you on. But maybe I'll mature a little bit later down the track. I've got one last question for you. You've obviously done a lot in your life so far in the 120 years you've been here, and and you're still doing a lot right now. How do you find, and this is, I think, is a really important question, how do you find that balance between being an entrepreneur and what you're doing, and maintaining a sane life, that you're not constantly, or do you work 24/7? I know you do rock climbing.
Well, not as much as I should. Not as much as I'd like to. But that's a really important question, and it's really I'm thankful that you asked that question, because I think that the comment on that is a good space to be in, primarily because it's been a struggle, and it's still a struggle, and I think it'll continue to be a struggle because of the kind of people we are. But I put boundaries in place. Like I only have meetings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and they're packed, like from morning to the evening, but only meetings happen on those days. And I've put that boundary so that I'm just not doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff. I have been off email for quite a few months now, over 6 months. So I don't check email at all, zero. And again, but I have systems in place to take care of that. But even that has been a struggle. So the reason I'm saying all these things is I'm trying to deliver when I deliver the best as I can. And I have amazing support around me. Like, my team is phenomenal. We had a crazy meeting this morning at like 8:00. But that support system is just phenomenal. My friends around me, the people that wish me well around me, is like such a huge number. And And I think my wife keeps me grounded because she'll say things like, because I still take things hard. Like I think things like, a team member leaving and that kind of stuff really hard. So even though they might be going on to better things, it's still something that I take time to get over. And she says to me, like, you can't bring this home. Like, you have to let this go. You're not being attacked right now. You can think about this tomorrow. And I think that struggle there, that we keep ourselves in this fight or flight mode for longer than we need to, is what's probably the main thing that's making us burn out as entrepreneurs, business owners, as parents, as husbands and wives and whatever else in between. I think it's that struggle there to be everything and do everything and constantly say that I've got these things to worry about when you don't. So reducing the amount of time you spend in fight or flight mode is super, super important. And please don't get me wrong, it is really hard, but it needs to be done. Look at the amount of people that are getting sick around us just because there's no time to relax. So that balance is hard because of the environment around us, but the more you remove yourself from that environment and create a new environment, the easier that becomes. And I hope I answered that question, because I think it's super important. That question is really, really important.
No, and I like what you said about, Tuesdays and Thursdays are your days for meetings. When I first started podcasting, it was like, oh yeah, I'll record whenever it suits you, Monday through to Sunday, whatever time. And I was jumping around all over the place. And then I eventually just went, you know what? I'm podcasting and doing all my recordings Wednesday. I'm prepared to start at 5 o'clock in the morning and I'll finish at 9 o'clock at night. And what's been funny is I've had people approach me and say, hey, I want to be on your podcast. I go, you know what? I'd love to have you on my show. I only record on Wednesdays. And they went, oh yeah, I play golf on Wednesdays. And I go, what, from 5 in the morning till 9 at night? And they go, oh, well, no, but that's like my day of relaxation. I go, well, that's my day of recording. So they didn't end up coming on my show. And I felt really good about it.
Yeah, I mean, and those lines are really important, because I think what happens is we have to wear our oxygen mask before we can put anyone else's on. So, yeah.
So, Ronsley, I just want to thank you for coming on It's No Secret, Dr. T. This has been fun, and you are my first guest that has dropped the F-bomb a couple of times. So I finally get to tick the little explicit box when I upload this to Libsyn. I haven't done that before, so that'll be interesting to see how that is received. So, Ronsley, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tyson. Thanks for having me. It's so cool to have interviewed you as the first episode and have to do episode 171.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to Ronsley today. And whether you have a podcast or whether you do not have a podcast, there were a couple of things that Ronsley said that I think are really, really important. And it was more around when he was talking about your return on investment. And it's not just about money. I know a lot of times we do different things and people always say, oh, what's your return on investment? And they're always thinking, what is the money return? But I think, what is your fulfillment return? What are the relationships you're building and what are the connections you're building? I think all that has to be taken into account, not just the money. So I thought that was a brilliant point, and I reckon I'm going to write a blog article just on that particular topic of return on investment. So yeah, I think Ronsley is one of the smartest guys that I know. If you haven't picked it up already, he is a very, very intelligent dude. So before I go, there's there's a review that I got from Inspired Money, and Andy Wong is the guy who has the Inspired Money podcast, and he left a review, and I wasn't going to read it out because it sort of gives me a slightly swollen head, but I'm going to read it anyway. And it says, I just subscribed. Tyson has a great mind for business and the experience to walk the walk. I enjoy listening to this podcast for actionable business advice and fun stories. Well done. Andy, thank you very much for that review on iTunes. I really appreciate it. And it's a message to everybody else. If you enjoy the podcast, please tell your friends and family. And if you happen to be on iTunes and you see that little review button, give it a click and tell me what you think, because the more people that know that this show is okay, and that's what reviews are all about. It's social proof. It's telling people the show is worth listening to. So before I go, just want to mention one other thing. If you're a podiatrist, go and check out my other podcast called the Podiatry Legends podcast. And even if you're not a podiatrist, you may still enjoy the stories that are shared there. They are very, very inspirational. So that's it from me. Look after yourself, look after your family, and I will talk to you again next week. Bye for now.